Everyone has bad days at work, and at the moment, everybody is feeling the pressure of fewer resources and less time with patients. But if your bad days are becoming more common, is the answer to ditch the day job and go freelance? This week, Dr. Richard Fieldhouse, founder and chairman of the National Association of Sessional GPs, joins me to take an honest and frank look at the different models of working. Is being a locum all it's cracked up to be? Now, the grass isn't necessarily greener on the other side. If you don't have regular work, you may fantasise about being in just one place with the great connections, certainty and stability that it brings us. Now, every way of working brings its own benefits and challenges. It all comes down to control and agency. If you want control over your working hours and your workload, more time for other strands to your career, but maybe less control over how you work in your workplace, freelancing might really suit you. But if you want less risk and more say in what we do around here, you might want more regular employment. We talk about why this isn't black and white and what freelancers and locums can learn about how to influence your work environment from permanent staff, and what partners and consultants can learn about managing their workload, taking more control and responsibility from locums and freelancers. So if you're thinking about making a change in your career in 2026, this conversation with Richard will really help you get clear on what's available. It'll help you weigh up the pros and cons of each and help you let go of the sneaking suspicion that one way of working is more worthy than another.
I'm Richard Fieldhouse. I'm a GP and I am chairman and founder of the National Association of Sessional GPs, and I've worked as a GP locum pretty much all my GP career, apart from a small stint as a GP partner at the beginning and more recently for a year as a salaried GP.
It's wonderful to have you on the podcast, Richard, and there's so many different things we could talk about. I'm particularly interested in what your views are of both sides of the coin. So you've worked as a partner, you've worked as a locum, and you've seen everything in between, and you're constantly talking to hundreds of people who are doing various different iterations of, I guess, the same sort of job. And so we're going to delve in this podcast to why people choose different sort of ways of working, the advantages and the disadvantages of both. But first of all, I just want to dig down below the surface, because many doctors, many healthcare professionals just feel really stuck, regardless of their role, regardless of whether they are a locum, a bank staff, or a partner, a clinical director, or a consultant. So when you've been talking to people, I guess people in the National Association of Sessional GPs, other locums, or the partners you talk to in practice or consultants, what do you hear them really longing for most in their careers and in their work?
I guess, and patience as well. I would say for me, what seems to be the common theme is that feeling of kind of being wedged in this corner where there is an imbalance in their career, in their home lives, in kind of almost everything they do. But in that, it's an imbalance between control and responsibility. If they are starting to feel that their boss or somehow the job they're doing, they're starting to have less control, less flexibility, less freedom, that seems to cause anxiety. And then the responsibility, if they coupled, okay, fair enough. If they get with that less responsibility, that's balancing itself out. But that doesn't really happen. We tend to find ourselves having less control and more responsibility. Sometimes in a job, you can have tons of responsibility that can be overwhelming. But if you've got control of that, if you can control that responsibility, whether in forms of time or volume or where and when you do it, that's great. And that can help you balance. I mean, I think as GPs, as doctors, we love responsibility. We went into this job. As a junior, as a resident doctor, the day you qualify after your GP training, as a GP, your GMC registration changes overnight to be you are now registered as a doctor, but who has to take responsibility for everything they do, and you're no longer part of a kind of a hierarchy or having a line manager. You're now practicing independently and without supervision, and that's the first time that happens. Prior to your qualification as a GP, you are effectively being supervised, and I don't think we often appreciate the responsibility that goes with it. It's a huge change in responsibility. So we have to be in control. There's a phrase that came into primary care, which I was, having worked as a GP locum for 30 years. About 15 years ago, this word started to talk, but when people talk about locum work, GP locum work, they started to talk about shifts. What's a shift? A shift. So a shift to me is a shift worker is someone who fits into a slot. There's a start time, there's a finish time. It's kind of like a clock mechanism with lots of cogs, and a cog goes home, you fit into that cog's place, and you're part of this machine. And that word lends itself really well to how hospitals work. Hospitals work 24/7. If you are working as a locum in a hospital, you're fitting into a shift as part of a team. You can't run an entire neurology department on your own. Your mechanism is a component of that. But when you are practicing as a GP in your consulting room, from the moment that patient steps in to way beyond that patient leaves that room, you are responsible. And you have to be in control of that, because if something goes south or pear-shaped, you've got to be responsible for it. So fitting into if you're the type of GP who can feels very comfortable balancing risk in a 10-minute appointment, feel really comfortable and might even enjoy the number of patients you see, that's great. Good on you. But there are plenty of GPs who find that untenable and who really struggle with that. And the way they work is they're much more into 20 minutes, half an hour. My lovely wife, Sarah, is one of those GPs who, trust me, as a patient, you really want to see, because every patient she needs 30 minutes for. But when fitting into 20 minutes or 15 minutes, really finds that stressful. And so I think with the complexity of disease these days and care and management, and fortunately the 10-minute appointments seem to be really heading out the door now, much more into 15-minute appointments. But even so, there's still a constraint in that if you're what we as an organisation, we have a platform, and what we allow our members to do, those who work as freelance GP locums, is they put themselves out there on the platform to practice and say, look, I'm a GP who does 20-minute appointments. If you're going to hire me, you're going to have to hire me at 20 minutes. Because if you hire me at 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you're just not going to get good value for money. I'm going to be stressed. I'm not going to be forming at my peak. So it's about having that responsibility and control. So not for GPs, we need to not be thinking in the mindset of a shift. We call it sessions, and you need to, as a GP, we need to define those sessions. Otherwise, we're going to struggle.
Yeah, I guess that's why you call yourselves the National Association of Sessional GPs, not shift working.
Exactly.
Not shift working GPs. I would challenge that a bit though, because I think consultants in hospitals, yes, there should be colleagues to cover work. So for an A&E doctor, when they are off their shift, there is somebody else on the shop floor seeing the patients. But there's a huge amount of other work that the consultants do that just has to get done, whether they're on shift or not. And, I was talking to a community paediatrician recently who has a huge workload. She has no colleague, so they are all hers, whether she's at work or not. So I think this concept that you can just walk off and someone else covers you doesn't really hold true in hospitals either, particularly the more senior you get. And then the juniors, we've all seen the issues with shift working and juniors who just don't feel part of the team. And because they are just treated like a cog in the wheel, that's massively disempowering and not very great for teamwork and stuff. So I don't think it benefits anybody, does it? But it is this issue about control that goes with the responsibility. Because I've noticed as doctors and senior healthcare professionals, senior managers, senior nurses, senior allied health professionals, we just take on the default responsibility for everything. And my observation is that when we get sick of that and we can see the control dropping, maybe about the way we work, how we're rostered onto shifts, or, for example, if I was in a practice and they were saying, no, you're doing 10-minute appointments. And I just thought I can't do that. That's not suit the way I want to work. That's when we go, okay, maybe another way of working would suit me better. If I then go and be a locum GP or a locum consultant, I have much more control over what I choose to say yes and no to in terms of shifts. And also I can stipulate to some extent, some people find it difficult to do that, the number of appointments and the length of the appointments that I do. So in my head, going to be a locum gives perhaps the illusion of a bit more, well, it definitely gives you more control over some things, but in other ways, it gives you less control.
Yes, and that can all in terms of the way that the marketplace in terms of working as a GP locum fluctuates as well. And by the way, I'm in no way qualified to talk about hospital freelance consultant or locum work. It's something I've had very little experience with, but also it seems to go in 10-year cycles. Every 10 years, there's the workforce seems to be over provided with GPs, which is where we've very recently been. I think we're coming out of that again. Bang on 30 years ago, I started NASGP because when I qualified, there were no jobs. And 10 years later, same thing. A further 10, same thing. And it's the same thing at the moment. So if you're a GP locum listening to this, you're thinking, oh my God, I'll take any work you give me. And they're desperate for work in many situations, and again, geographically different parts of the country. So yeah, very much you take what's on offer if there is anything on offer. So it in an ideal world, yes, as what our aspiration is to have this perfect balance between responsibility and control. But in the real world, it's particularly at the moment, that's just simply not the case. And people are doing, reducing their prices, working more, fitting into 10-minute appointments, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So in a market where people need sessional doctors, great. But when they don't, suddenly the control goes again. You were a partner for a few years and then you moved into being a sessional doctor. What did you think that being a sessional GP, that being a locum was going to solve, that it actually didn't solve?
What it's at the time, what it solved is I was young, I was married to another GP and having children, and for that it was fantastic. As co-parenting two lovely boys, and it worked really well. What it didn't solve, I guess, but I think in that way I'm quite different. I think for a lot of locums it doesn't solve that itch, which is the sense of value, the sense of purpose of being a GP, because we are told, we see so often everywhere, that in order to be a GP, we have to do this continuity of care, which we have so much research in general practice to prove is an absolutely wonderful thing. And it brings so much joy to many GPs that we are able to see patients again and again and form these relationships, these therapeutic relationships with them. And I kind of missed that. And I was told a lot as well, why wasn't I a proper GP? Don't I miss that? And colleagues would say, actually, Richard, I've really enjoyed locuming, but I just feel I need to become a partner or a salaried because of that continuity of care. And so that I missed, but then over the years, that's kind of gone full circle, I think, in many ways, that actually I feel we're kind of being sold like a romantic novel. It's a bit Mills and Boon, and there are some great things about continuity of care. Don't get me wrong, but also it does have its flip side. And I've even sat next to senior people at significant primary care medical organisations and have said, look, the King's Fund did this huge paper on continuity of care, but in it they said there's potential flip side. We, as a profession, we've done very, very little to even start to look at what these could be. And I said, maybe we should, as a profession, dear colleague, start to explore that. And it was this profound silence. And no, Richard, we don't want to open that Pandora's box. And which is a real shame, because I think that what I've found, those colleagues of mine who've gone back, who then returned back to locuming, had burnt out. And so often as an organisation, we set up and run these very formal GP locum peer support groups. We call them GP locum chambers. Meet regularly, establish professional friendships, and really helps resolve professional isolation. But people have joined that because they've been partners or salaried in a practice, but often for the purpose to have that continuity of care. Yet in these days, in modern general practice, it's really, really difficult to see the same patient again and again. And with triage and with multidisciplinary teams and all this sort of thing, even GP partners are really struggling for that. And I've noticed that when I've been on a regular basis in a practice, just the patients just do not have that continuity.
Yeah, certainly. I've noticed a friend of mine was trying to speak to the same GP. It was really hard just because of the models. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just our models are having to change because of the patient demand. But I just want to go back to something you said about this sort of people felt they ought to go back and be a partner or be, in a practice because of this continuity of care. And I totally agree. It is a joy to see the same person and be able to deal with them, from start to finish. My dad was a GP. His version of continuity of care is literally he saw the mum, he worked through her pregnancy with her, he delivered the baby, and then he delivered the baby of the next generation. And then, that's continuity of care, like 40 years, isn't it, really? So that's changed. Nowadays, you very rarely have that sort of thing. You're certainly not delivering any babies. But I just wonder whether we come up with some excuses and some reasons to mask some of the guilt we feel when we, or to sort of silently beat someone up for choosing a different way of working. That sort of, you're missing out on continuity of care, you're missing out on this and that. And so subtly, if you choose to work in a sessional freelance way, you're made to feel not quite as good as, or you're not quite doing the right thing for your patient. So it's this sort of subtle way of maybe the people who are in the system feeling a bit resentful. I'd love to do that, but actually these are what matters, and genuinely believe it. Or we just beat ourselves up about being selfish for choosing a way of working that's actually going to suit us better.
And the worst offenders of this thing out beating are us GP locums ourselves, beating ourselves up. So often we say, "Oh, I'm just a locum," and you think, "Stop there. Let's rewind. Why are you just a locum?" And I've had GP partners in practice say, "Richard, when are you going to get a proper job?" We kind of gaslight ourselves, and we kind of, but I think in every GP conference kind of sub-headline, it's about continuity of care. It's this we've as a profession, we've really nailed our one flag to the one mast, and I think we're really struggling to provide it. I was thinking, I've lived in sunny Chichester for pretty much all my life. It was my 60th birthday yesterday. I know.
Happy birthday! Congratulations!
Thank you. And I've lived here all my life. I'm very, very boring, and romantically, I think of what a great city it is and all of that. But of course, I go out the door, and I think every day of my life that I've spent around Chichester, walking through or walking around or cycling around or driving around, there's always roadworks. Or it's potholes. But hold on a minute, if we didn't have roadworks, we'd have more potholes. You can't build streets and without having some way to some replacements to maintain them and to give the kind of road a rest and actually repair it and keep it up to date. And there is so much about this silent role of a GP locum. Actually, you're stepping in to allow other people who are providing that continuity to have a break or to go off sick because they've hit a pothole. And that's a lovely thing to do, but it's so rarely celebrated, and particularly by us GP locums. Another thing is that is the agility. It's that we are there to allow access for patients. If it wasn't for us working that day or that afternoon or that week, patient wouldn't have been able to see a GP or come into the practice and see someone. There's that fresh pair of eyes. The countless times I've spoken to colleagues who are working as GP locums, and they've picked something up because the regular GP was just got so used to seeing the same patient. We build in these heuristics about a patient. We build in these patterns, these stories. As humans, we love to see patterns. We love to see clear roads. But as a GP, I'm often picking up what someone else missed, and I'm sure other GPs are picking up what I missed. I know they do. So there's this lovely, romantic, touchy-feely continuity of care, which as a profession with this sort of confirmation bias, we've gone out and said, right, continuity, let's go out and write so much research to prove that it works. Yeah. But let's look at the side effects. No, we don't want to see the downsides of it. But I think that we as an organization see anecdotally very much those people who have come a cropper with a way of working as a primary care where the sense of purpose as a GP hasn't matched their sense of purpose. There's been a clash. There's too much friction, and they've lost sight of all those buffers, all those simple patterns that they would need to help them get out of their circle of stress.
And I think there are, some patients absolutely would benefit from continuity of care, but most people just want to get in and sit.
Yes, yes.
I just want to be able to talk to someone when I need to, rather than, waiting a long time. I think underlying all this is this sort of feeling that it's not a proper job, that somehow there's this hierarchy in medicine or healthcare of actually you are the bee's knees if you are a clinical lead or a senior partner in a department, doing something with continuity. But I'm always astounded by people who are working as partners and also have very senior leadership roles elsewhere. Because I think to myself, how on earth can you do that? And I always look at them and think, how is anybody getting the best out of you? Because a partner is a really involved job. You have to decide that you want to run that business. That's really quite hard to run with all the funding dropping and stuff like that. And there's some people that are 100% brilliant at that. And that's where they need to focus. And then there's other people that think, well, they go into leadership in other roles, in which case, if you split your attention too much, you're focusing on having to run that business or having to, be part of the leadership team for your department, yet you've got another, really serious job over here. It's not going to work. And if there's one thing I've learned over time doing this podcast, is like, you've got to focus on one thing and do one thing really, really well. Or do something as like the sort of day job that keeps going whilst you focus on the really hard thing over here. Everything in your week cannot be hard, I think is what I'm saying. And everything in the week cannot take all that responsibility for you. But that's where I see doctors burning themselves out. So if they could be a partner but didn't have any responsibility at home and had all the time in the world and stuff like that, and they love the sort of leadership business side of things, then they're probably going to thrive.
I really do think that all GPs are leaders. It's a leadership role. You kind of a leader. When you think of your patients, you're kind of, in that respect, a leader. I think it fulfills the leadership definitions very, very well. We just do not think of it in that way, but it kind of goes with that. So then to also be a partner in a practice, or also have other leadership roles, when you're doing one job, your mind is kind of slightly thinking of the other job. And that is really difficult. So yeah, I very much agree with your sentiments. How we can square that and allow people to just be clinical directors at an ICB or just be senior GPs running a practice without necessarily the patient load, I don't know.
Well, I'm just wondering, if there is something about the sessional work, which means that if you found somewhere that was, you could go in, do your job and finish without the having to sort of work around it. Someone told me that clinical leaders in the NHS, like partners, clinical directors, do like 40% of their leadership work, or even 60% of their leadership work out of hours, like at home or in the evening, the weekend. Now, I haven't been able to find that statistic to back it up, but it certainly rings true for me and the leaders that I've seen. And what I've noticed that when people do go into senior leadership, because I agree, I think all doctors are leaders, and most healthcare professionals leaders, because the minute you have been working for more than like a couple of years, you're supervising somebody else, aren't you? You're supervising a junior coming up. So even if you're not see yourself as a leader, you are, because people are asking you things, asking you questions, wanting to know stuff from you. So there's that sort of leader probably with a small L, but then there's the leader with the big L, where you do feel that default responsibility of like, if anything goes wrong here, I'm going to have to cover. And certainly the partner in a practice, you feel like that as the clinical lead for a hospital department. I think you possibly feel that as well. So there's that extra responsibility, and having more than one role with that default responsibility. I mean, maybe there's quite a lot at home as well. I think to have 3 roles where you've got that default responsibility of the leadership, I've got to cover if anything goes wrong, of the kids at home, if someone goes off, cut kids off school, I've got to cover and pick them up, and something else like a PCN clinical director. It's just like, how on earth can you do that? There's just too much mental load then, too much emotional load. And that is where I see people burn out when they don't have time to do anything better. Yet in my own life, I definitely have seen that the more I can focus on one thing and do that one thing well, that is where I have the impact. But it does rely on me getting over the guilt and the shame of not being good enough because I haven't followed the traditional career and I don't have the badge of a consultant or a partner.
That very much suggests how it works as a GP locum. What's brilliant about it is that you have a constraint. You have a start time, you have a finish time, and if you have to do all your job, all you can within that time that you're being paid for, that they've allocated the afternoon or the room for. Hit 1 o'clock, someone else is in that room. Everything you've done has got to be finished. You can't finish it that evening or tomorrow because you won't be there. I've worked in up to 30 different practices a year, up to 10 different practices in a month. You have to, when you finish, you have to properly finish. And if you can't, if you wake up in the night, as so often I think I did as a locum, and I think locums do, you think, oh God, did I do this? Did I do that? As an organisation, we developed lots of different templates, but one of those is, it's a sort of, right, you finish your session, you look at this template and go through each patient in your mind or through the screen, and which of these is going to wake you up at 4 a.m. Write it down, write what's going to wake you up, and so so we can stop that anxiety. And the number of times I have actually found I've been back to the practice, I had to phone them up, or I suddenly realised. I remember one holiday in the Rhinogs in Wales, hiking, thinking, oh my God, I didn't do such and such a blood test on a patient. And I felt terrible. And it kind of ruined my holiday, which is crazy, but not crazy. And I had no way of doing anything about that. I suppose that happens to every GP. But it's something that we all as GPs feel. We have that sort of guilt and that feeling of oh, damn, that's really embarrassing and bad for the poor patient. And, what can I do about it?
I guess if you're going back to the same place day after day, you're going to spot it quicker. Perhaps I had that on a train. It was a really crowded commuter train. I'd done a locum session in the morning and I suddenly realised, very important thing, I should have checked with the patient, and I had to try and phone the practice. But we had everyone on the train. Like, how can you be confidential? Standing in a carriage going, I'm just going to tell you the date of birth and I'm going to talk in code the name, and oh gosh, yeah. But you're right. I mean, that doesn't necessarily stop if you're a locum. That can happen anywhere, can't it? I think people try and get some agency of control and become a sessional doctor or a locum, or stop being the clinical lead or stop being a partner because they want more agency and more more control over their shifts and their rotas, although, as you said, that doesn't always happen. But I think there's a bit of a myth that as a leader and as a partner, you have massive amounts of control anyway, because I think sometimes because of the responsibility, you feel a real lack of control, that you have to do it. Yes, you might have a bit of control over if you then decide to, so if the whole practice can go to 20-minute appointments or not. But then again, if that person doesn't turn up and you're on annual leave and there's nobody to cover, you have to go in and do it, or you're the one working out of hours on that complaint that's come in about a member of staff and things like that. So I think this illusion of control, I think works both ways. What we're trying to do is get some agency back, get some control back. But one path has a little bit of guilt and shame around it because, like you said, when you're going to be a proper GP, and the other path has a lot of guilt and shame from the default responsibility. And so you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, really.
Yeah. And I guess I think that's where our pay grade comes in. That's where, there is a choice we make when we go to medical school, although we probably don't realise it at the age of 16 when we start but actually that's what we're taking on. In that there is going to be that lots of responsibility, but lots of control. And I think in any career, there's always going to be that. I think with a general practice at the moment, two things is, one is that control and responsibility balance has changed. It seems to become a little bit unfair and more unequal every year. We seem to, as GPs, we're getting less control, having more targets, KPIs, all that sort of thing, but also we're getting more responsibilities, taking on more hospital prescribing. We're having to take on much, much more risk because of access and capacity at hospitals and waiting lists and even workforce in general practice and lack of consulting rooms and all that kind of thing. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing about responsibility and control is just the volume of work, the amount of time we have to be doing it in. Now, if it's just 9 to 5, you can then go home, unwind, take up a leisure pursuit, walk the dog, whatever's your bag is, you can then unwind, you can relax, you can de-stress, you can think about, you can have that creativity that helps you manage future problems. I was talking to a colleague recently about the one's hard drive being 80% full, and if it starts to go above that, and we start to fill a hard drive up, the computer starts to slow down. And I think that's so true of so many GPs, is they don't get home till at 10 o'clock at night, and then it's, watch a bit of Detectorists, and then it's off to bed, and then it's same old, and taking laptops home and doing work from home, and so it's the change in balance, and it's the increase in volume or the decrease in volume of that leisure time.
So I think locums possibly understand a bit more about boundaries because they have to, right? Because you're not going in the next day. You have to get everything done, so you have to understand more about limits and boundaries. So what advice would you, as a sessional GP, give to, a senior partner or a senior consultant? And then I'm going to ask the other question as well, where partners and consultants, what advice would they give to locums around, actually being able to change things and influence and stuff when they're, and that feeling of lack of control when they do go in? Because I think both groups could learn from each other around that. So let's start off with the boundaries.
Heaven forbid if I was proffering my advice to a GP partner. I suppose what it would be is along the lines of, there's a definition, lack of constraints is the enemy of creativity. So an artist, if they say to a kid, right, paint me a picture of some flowers, here's paints and crayons and all of that, freak out. But if you say, right, here's blue, a green and a red, piece of paper and some ink, now draw, just using that, then we can be creative. The best artists, I think, their artworks are constrained. They've used very simple tools. And I think when you are a professional and in a leadership role, like every GP, you need that creativity. But if you are not giving it enough importance in your day, in your life, if you are just dismissing it as potentially frivolous, it's a really important part of your toolbox to have that capacity to stop, to unwind, to do something that's totally different, whether that's a bit of yoga or jogging or painting or walking the dog, something that you can get that extra capacity, sort of defragment your hard drive. So it would be actually booking actual time out, not so much what you do, it's what you don't do, in terms of your professional way of working. And that's going to benefit you, your relationships, your ability to think creatively about your career and the way you learn and reflect. You're not going to be able to reflect and learn and grow as a professional if you're not giving yourself time and spending yourself instead just going through results or whatever it is you're finding yourself having to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you say it's obviously block off time for your hobbies and your leisure pursuits. I think one of the best ways to do that is, have something you have to go to, tennis lesson at 7:00. So you've got to go. But I think there's also something about blocking off the time for the leadership work that you don't have. When I've been talking to partners, I'm like, how much time have you got blocked off in your week to do the partnership work, or how much official little time have you been given? And people say like quarter of a session or something like that. It's just unbelievable. It's like, how can you do that in that? And as a partner, you can raise that issues, and people might say to me, oh, well, we don't have enough appointments, enough time. Well, okay, it might cost you, but if every partner had enough time blocked off during the working week to actually do the partnership work, the partnership might actually start to solve some of the issues. But yes, the income would go down, and like these things are figure outable. And yes, that's reality. But you've got to choose. So I think there's a sort of denying of reality about how long things actually take. And so, yeah, there's some things about saying no, and we do a lot of work around boundaries and saying no, and often it's because we feel so bad and we don't want to let people down and we feel guilty rather than patient harm. So there's that. So there's booking in the time for work, saying no, and actually putting in the boundaries and knowing that you can do that. I've noticed myself that there's things that feel very urgent, and after I've closed my computer and done something else, they suddenly don't feel quite so urgent anymore. What would consultants and partners say to locums that they could do differently to actually feel that they weren't, I don't know, second-class citizens or someone that doesn't have any control once they're in the workplace just doing that surgery?
My advice to GP locums would be just to, so I've always said to my sons as well, I've always said to my two boys, I've just said volunteer for as much, always ask if you can help someone, always go to, when you finish your work, when you finish what you've kind of agreed to do, say the patients, any paperwork, any admin, go around and ask a few people, is there anything else I can do? I've got some time, or maybe I have not, what can I do to help? What can I do what have I missed? Just check in, triangulate, yourself with the rest of the team, because a practice is a team. And there's a big tendency for as GP locums to kind of be shown your room, and you kind of can stay there for 4 or 5 hours, and then it's like rush out because in the afternoon you're on call somewhere else, 45 minutes drive away, and you're really stressed about that, so we can just rush out. So I would say check in. I would also say ask for feedback and give feedback. Show that you are thinking ahead, show that you're open-minded, show that you are open to criticism or open to learning, or just be cognizant that you're a team player and that you want to learn, but also you can't pay a McKinsey consultant to anyone else to come into your consulting room like you can a GP locum, to open up your EMIS or System 1 operating system, to see the patients, talk to the patients, chat about the GPs they've seen before. We have this absolutely unique perspective, so powerful. And then, and we're holding this incredible soft intelligence about the practice, how the practice works, how the practice operates. When we have our chamber meetings, and often they're lovely affairs, they're really good fun, but sometimes the GP locum will start saying, oh, actually, do you know, I've been working in such and such a practice. Oh, you don't want to work there, it's awful, you know, they do this. And some other locums, oh yeah, I've worked there. Oh, and yeah, and all the other locums, especially the newly qualified GP locums, will be saying, oh yeah, I won't work there either. And we kind of we have a policy to, look, hold on a minute. Look, you know, that poor practice is probably really, really struggling. And have you mentioned this to them? So again, we've created templates and just a way of working that is actually, these practices would be desperate to know what you've just said. And what we found as an organisation, as a network of locum chambers, is when a locum in a meeting presses that red button about a practice, we stop. We say, right, everyone, here's a little questionnaire we're going to send you all. Everybody who's worked there, we're going to ask 5 questions, 5 very simple questions. It's what did you really like most about this practice? What one thing could this practice do better to help you work there or other locums work there? What one thing worried you about this practice? And then a couple of other questions. And then we collate that and we give it back to the practice. And then so the practice has these anonymized insights from a bunch of locums from this peer support group. And it's really, really powerful. And we've even created a CQC methodology for that as well, for free, you know, all free for practice as an organization. We want our GP locums. We think working as a GP locum, your main job is to support practices. That's what really you're there for. You're there to support practice, to support their patients, and you doing as good a job. And you've got you using your unique insight to help those practices pick up on stuff that, because you've got that fresh pair of eyes, you can spread best practice from other practices. There's so much we have to offer to practices, but if we just leave the second our clock gets to 1 o'clock, whatever, that we're missing being able to give so much. So volunteer this information freely to practices, and they will thank you for it in all sorts of ways.
I absolutely love that reframe, that actually you're there to support best practice in general practice overall, and being able to feedback. What a gift, because you've seen what works in other practices. So you can share that and you can say, well, this isn't working here, but this is, and let's take that back. You know, there's that 90-day rule, isn't there? That once you've been working somewhere for 90 days, you just don't notice things anymore because you've got such a unique perspective on that. So I absolutely love that. And
it's like when you go back to your parents' house, having not been there for ages, and you think, how long have you had that orange carpet there? It's disgusting.
Why do you keep your stuff in that drawer?
I know. And yeah, you're not 90-day rule. I love that.
I think what we've been talking about is people desperate to get some control back over their workload, over their timetable, and over this feeling of, if I don't do it all, no one's going to do it. So therefore I have to. And I think people think that the grass is greener on either side. The grass is greener by being a sessional doctor, or being a locum. And I guess you get the sessional GPs who are employed GPs as like this halfway house between a partner, you're a salaried GP, so they used to be called salaried GPs, portfolio GPs, and, you know, your freelancers. And then you've got that cohort thinking, oh, I wish if only I was a partner, I'd have more control over how things are done. I'd feel like I was actually achieving stuff, or if I was a consultant or a clinical lead there, and both, they're just looking at the other people going, you've got it okay, as it were, or crumbs, I could never cope with that, etc., etc. But I think what I have noticed is that it just doesn't matter what your job title or what your role is. It's all about how you're crafting a career that is right for you, that means you can do things that are in your zone of genius and you can earn a living, right? Because we've all got to earn a living, but not every single thing that you're doing is that hugely high responsible thing. And so anything goes, but we just need to remove the shame and the judgment from what your career choice is. But secondly, I think everyone just needs a bit more empowering about control, because responsibility without control is the recipe for burnout. 100%. There's been loads of studies that have shown that. So it's about, how do you get more control of your work and your workload? And for some people, it may be going freelance, but for some people, it might be actually saying no to yourself and putting those internal boundaries in, or raising things that work. So what would you say to people that are saying, well, if I stop doing the things that keep everything going, what's going to happen next? I can't just do that. What would you advise somebody who's just thinking?
I would, in an ideal world, I think in general practice, we would be a lot more open-minded, perhaps a lot more kinder to these different ways of working, and maybe just make it much easier to transition between them. Every year I do dozens of free webinar talks to any VTS scheme in the country that wants to talk. I will happily give it for an hour, and I chat about working as a locum and all of that. But it's to GPs who are about to qualify. And kind of what I always say is it didn't used to be the case, but the great thing about working as a GP is it's so much easier these days, in terms of it's not as shameful as it was many, many years ago to change roles, to start off when you qualify, actually, providing you can get some good peer support, like through a chambers or something else, have really good peer support, then working as a locum is a brilliant way to sort of try before you buy, to try out lots of different practices, different parts of the country, rural, city, you name it. Try all those different things. And then, depending on where you want to go, the way your family operates, your partner, what their career is up to at the moment, kids, all that kind of thing. There are different times when it suits you to be in a different place. It may well be that that's time between the kids going to university and you've still got another 10 years of career left. That might be a really good time to become a partner. You've got that more time. You're juggling less things, hopefully. Maybe, but prior to that, salaried might be better. But then again, there's the control of the holidays, not being able to take the holidays. So you might therefore for you, if depending on what your partner does, working as a locum, if it was easy to transition, and if there wasn't this, it seems a huge leap becoming a partner. Every partner I've ever met, I've just inspired by how much work it is and all the stuff they do that they don't otherwise talk about. And they'll mention it in passing, and you think, you've done what? That's incredible. You're on that committee? That thing exists? You have to do that? All these jobs and all these roles. And how do you manage? I'm so glad I'm a locum. I don't have to do that. Juggling all these different things. And so what you were saying earlier on about being a GP partner and having to spend so much of that doing leadership stuff, well, couldn't you just be a GP partner and just see patients, and have that as your so you have that, you're the one be able to keep the plate spinning for that continuity. You might almost like you're the continuity partner. Your leadership role in this practice is to make sure that those patients that need continuity get continuity. What a lovely role for a GP partner to be, not having to go to the prescribing meeting or PC and all that sort of stuff.
And you'd do that in an actual business, wouldn't you? You wouldn't have, the CFO wouldn't be doing everything and et cetera. But for some reason, there's this sort of flatness that all the partners have to decide everything. And it's just not doable. How would you advise someone who was thinking of doing not a career change, but just organising the way they work differently? Because that's all that it is. But is sort of, there's something niggling at them. Might be sense of losing their sense of worth or identity or, status. What would you advise them?
I would advise, I think probably like what I said as a GP locum when you're finishing for the morning or the afternoon or whatever, is speak to people, talk to other people, join a peer support group. But you need to have that headspace. You need to have that 20% of your hard drive free. You need to have the creativity, the energy, should I say, to have, so that you then can be creative with it or reflective with it. It's a huge decision to make. If you're feeling in that way, you may well have been doing something, you may have got yourself into a habit, you've been doing it for longer than 90 days, so you don't know you're doing it. You kind of need that mentorish type support from an individual or from a group. You need trust, you need that psychological safety, you need that buzz. And in our chambers, we really focus on psychological safety and having buzz, having a sense of fun, having, so you can laugh and have a chortle with your friends. You make sure that you've got GPs who are not just your colleagues but your friends as well. And if you've got that, and so you're there, you're in a position to be open to advice, to ask for advice. You've got colleagues to help you, not even advice, just to this is what we would advise the patient is to talk about it and have that time to not be thinking about the day job all the time. So easily said for many. And I think if you're thinking, gosh, that's just not me, I will never have that, then you are precisely the sort of people who probably need to be having that reflective time out.
And I think on the identity level, I think rather than thinking, well, I left because I couldn't hack it, that wasn't true at all. I left because I found something else I wanted to focus on. And at that point, the way I was working wasn't working for me, and it didn't suit me. And I just would stress the importance of really focusing on one main thing. And yeah, there can be a few things around that, but the one thing that you feel like is your baby and you're responsible for, I'm guessing for you, Richard, that is the NAS GP, right? And that would be very hard to do if you also were a partner somewhere else and having to manage all that responsibility too. And you'll have much more impact focusing on one main thing. The second thing I would say that I just sort of realised is along the "you are not a frog" theme. So we're this frog in the pan of boiling water that's slowly heating up, and the workload is getting worse and the control has gone down. You have options. Like, frogs can only burn out or jump out and leave entirely. But you could do something to turn down the heat in the pan. Like, so many people haven't actually asked for what they actually need, or looked at the way that they're working within their employed job, or as a consultant, a salaried GP, or as a partner or another healthcare profession. They haven't actually explored, could the sessions be changed? Could the timings be changed? Could they have longer appointments? Things that actually would turn down the heat for you. So there's that one. There's then jumping out of your pan into a different pan. And that different pan might be the pan of being freelance, or the pan of being salaried, or even jumping out of freelance into being a partner. That might work for you. That might absolutely suit you. But sometimes you don't know till you've done it, do you? And so trying stuff out, there's no shame in that. And then you've got the final option of getting out of pans altogether, and you could jump into a pond, do something totally different. And sometimes I know I've been I just want to go and work in a coffee shop making coffees. But I take myself with me, right? That's the problem. You take yourself and the drivenness and the wanting to achieve and the identity stuff. So I know the minute I get to a coffee shop, I'll be like, right, let's make this, let's franchise it out. What can we do to make this even more impressive? So you take yourself with you. So it's all got to come from within, hasn't it? It's got to your job satisfaction and the meaning in life has got to be from internal motivation rather than what your job title is or how successful you look. And it's all about what enables you to focus on the one thing that's important and to live in the way that you want to live, remembering that no one on their deathbed ever said, I wish I spent more time at the office.
I suppose it's having the privilege of having the headspace to be able to make that switch, because the changing tracks in itself takes the ability to make a decision, to come to a decision and do that. And as you were talking, I was thinking in my life, what has really helped me just kind of have the headspace. It was about 7-8 years ago. My dad's an art teacher. He's always been an art teacher, and he teaches pottery in his spare time, still does. And I thought, actually, I could try a bit of that. So I went to his pottery class, and I remember being covered in clay without my Apple Watch on, with no phone, which is the first time I'd done that in a long time, and stuck with 2 hours on a piece of slippery clay on a wheel. And after that 2 hours, I just thought, oh my God, I've just been thinking so many things that aren't work. Okay, a lot of it is about why won't this damn thing stay in the middle? But a lot of it was just the ability to form and shape stuff. But I then since then started to more and more in my off time, rather than go for a walk where we'd talk about work or trying to read a book and then start thinking about work, and usually sort of work related books, which just makes you think more about work, is actually try stuff that was nothing to do with that, and having that ability to shape new things and try different ways of seeing stuff. And I now do lots of painting and drawing and all that kind of stuff. And I find that for me personally, really helps just think abstractly about, have an abstract approach to life and work all that. So that I'm thinking about your 90-day rule. What if you do that for 9 years or 19 years? It's just so. What can we do that's slightly different? That is the trigger, the switch that actually starts that change process to get ourselves out of any ruts we've got ourselves into.
Yeah, and I think that, even just taking time off, like prolonged, like 2 or 3 weeks, or a sabbatical for 6 weeks, just gets you far enough away from what you're doing to begin to think, okay, well, does that title actually matter to me? How is it I want to live? What is it that I'm really starting to enjoy? But it does take a bit of distance. So if someone is genuinely not knowing what to do, don't make any rash decisions before you've just giving yourself time to decompress. Otherwise, what happens is you just throw the baby out the bathwater, and you end up doing something that you never really wanted to do, but you just thought that was the only option. And I'm sure you've seen people like that join the freelance brigade when actually they would have been better in a regular salary job, not having to manage all that uncertainty and stuff. So if you had sort of 3 top tips to give people about all of this, or about how to work that gives you more control and agency and just enjoy life as a clinician, what would it be?
I would say first thing is get your sense of purpose in order. I'm going back here to this whole thing about the continuity of care is the be all and end all. There is much more to general practice than that. It's what do you like to do as a person? If you're going to be the best GP you're going to be is the GP that starts off the day with energy and joy and looking forward to what you're going to do. And I think, again, all sorts of studies shows that if you're happy in your work, you perform much better, more efficiently, more effectively. You said earlier on, we were talking about, GP partners taking more time off to be happier at work, but that might affect the monetary level. It might not actually. It may well be that if they're happier and more creative and have that space and happier teams, they actually might come up with some much better ways of working, more efficient and more effective. So I think it's a sort of can be a synergistic effect. People, when they've joined our chambers and they've clearly had burnt out as partners, and I know 3 GPs over the years who said pretty much exactly the same thing, is that they love medicine, but they'd started to feel as a GP that they didn't love medicine anymore. They stopped, they had some time off, they started locuming, and they realized they love medicine. It was, thank God, it wasn't that they weren't enjoying. It was being that stuck in a rut. It was having that issue of being a partner, that they, in their particular partnership, had this issue with responsibility and control.
What's just striking me, Richard, is that you're talking about the jump from being a partner to being a freelancer, but also there's that jump from, say, if you are managing a team in a hospital and it's absolutely draining the life out of you, it's absolutely fine to stop doing that and just see the patients as well. So it's this jump from, I've got to be this leader, I've got to be in leadership here, to actually, I just want to do what actually I'm really good at. And that feels like a demotion. It feels like a status issue. But if you can get yourself over that, then it could be the absolute best thing you've ever done. Gosh, we could go and talk about this for ages. But Richard, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the podcast. How can people contact you or find out more about the National Association of Sessional GPs?
Yeah, Google us. We're www.nasgp.org.uk. Contact us through email is probably the best way. We've launched relatively recently a brand new sessional GP community that anyone can join for free, and it's forums and we've got one tonight. We've got these labs we're running for just allow anyone who wants to, any GP who wants to sign in and talk to other GPs about a specific topic, just to network. And we've got a fantastic our platform as well. Practices can all join for free as well, and it can help them hire locums, our members, through the platform, out of hours and daytime as well. So that all helps.
Great. We'll put all those links in the show notes, Richard. You're doing absolutely great work, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure.